And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we are going to begin applying the aggregate expenditure model to real-world events. So here I have my aggregate expenditure model. I have aggregate expenditures on the vertical axis. I have gross domestic product on the horizontal axis. This line is the aggregate expenditure curve, which includes in it consumption, planned investment, which remember does not include unplanned investment, does not include changes in inventory. So there's just planned investment. That's changes in capital and changes in new construction. So my aggregate expenditures are consumption, planned investment, government spending, and net exports. And then whenever one of these changes, that's going to cause a shift in the aggregate expenditure curve. Okay, and then this, where 45-degree line, which is when GDP is equal to aggregate expenditures, that happens only when change in inventories is equal to zero. That happens when unplanned investment is equal to zero. And so we said on a previous video, we will end up being in equilibrium here, where production is equal to aggregate expenditures. That will be the equilibrium level of gross domestic product. And that would be a problem if your equilibrium was below your potential. So if your potential GDP was somewhere out here and you were trapped in equilibrium below it, then that would be a problem, and what would we do about it? And those are some things that we'll deal with on future videos. For now, we just want to kind of manipulate the model a little bit. So let's get into it. Let's say that we get a real-world event, and the real-world event is stock prices rise by 20%. So if stock prices rise by 20%, then you would go back and look at all of your determinants and choose a determinant that will match up with this and therefore shift the curve. So let's go back. Let's go back and look at those determinants. So here are your choices. The determinants, remember, come under one of four categories, under consumption, investment, government spending, or net exports. And I think this one probably would go under consumption wealth. So I'd be right here, consumption wealth. So I would say, if we go back here, we say that if stock prices rise by 20%, then the determinant that changed is, I'm going to say, that causes a change in consumption wealth. That's going to be my shorthand. So the first letter here is the category, that's consumption, and the particular determinant is wealth. So this is going to be a change in consumption wealth. If my wealth goes up, then I will be willing to engage in more consumption. I will do more consumer spending. And so as a result of that, that will cause an increase in consumption, and that will cause the entire curve to shift up. Please note that this, unlike supply and demand, the aggregate expenditure curve shifts up. Okay, supply and demand we had shifted right and left usually. The aggregate expenditure curve shifts up and down. So we got an increase in consumption. Everything else stayed the same. So I'm going to label this aggregate expenditure curve 2 with the higher level of consumption. And let's see, that means that right here, this was at our old level of production. Then we get this increase in spending. So spending is now going to be above production. Spending right here is going to be above production. And that means, as a result of that, that means that inventories, if spending is above production, inventories are going to fall, and companies are going to begin increasing output. They're going to begin increasing output until we get to the new equilibrium level, the new intersection point, where aggregate expenditures are again equal to production, and that's going to be here at Y2. So then I would say my shift is was an increase in aggregate expenditures. The curve shifted up, and that caused an increase in the gross domestic product. That caused an increase in the gross domestic product. Now, how big is the increase? I'm not this next part I'm not going to do in every single example, but I do want to do it in this example. So I want to come back here to the multiplier idea and say, how big of a change does this cause? So let's say that the increase in stock prices by 20% caused consumption to go up by, let's say, consumers as a result increased their consumption by $10 million. Let's say they increased consumption by $10 million. So that means the change in initial spending was $10 million. That's what this is, the change in initial spending. And so consumption is going to go up, let's say, by $10 million. So that I would put on the graph right here. That would be your increase in consumption by 10. Sorry, that's a little hard to draw. Let me try that again. There would be your increase in consumption by $10 million. Right there. That'd be a $10 million increase in consumption, and that's what caused my aggregate expenditure curve to shift up. Now, as a result of that, remember that multiplier idea. That original increase in consumption is by $10 million will cause somebody else's income to go up, and that will then cause somebody else's consumption to go up, which will cause somebody else's income to go up, which will cause more consumption, and so forth, all the way through this multiplier effect. We talked about that on the previous video. If you need to review that, go back and check out that video. So what is the multiplier in this case? Well, let's say that we studied society and we found that the marginal propensity to consume was 0.75. If the marginal propensity to consume is 0.75, then the multiplier would be 1 divided by 1 minus 0.25. Sorry, 1 divided by 1 minus 0.75. And that would be 1 divided by 0.25. And then you run that through your calculator, and you should get a multiplier of 4. So that multiplier of 4, that comes down here and gets put in here for the multiplier. So the multiplier is 4, which means the total increase in the gross domestic product would be $40 million. And that would be right here. Right here would be your $40 million. So the increase in the GDP is a lot bigger than the original increase in consumption. So again, let's say it this way. Let me just write it out one more time. We have Y equals C plus IG plus G plus NX, and we get the original increase in consumption of 100 million. Of 10 million. That was my original increase in consumption of 10 million, and that caused GDP to go up by 10 million, and that causes consumption to go up by 75% of that. So when people start spending money, that money they spend becomes somebody else's income, and then that somebody else is going to spend that income. They're going to spend 7.5 million of it, 75% of it. So that causes consumption to go up by another 7.5 million, and that causes GDP to go up by 7.5 million, and that causes consumption to go up and GDP, and this just goes on and on and on and on. We did that on a previous video. But the final outcome of all of that is that if the initial spending goes up by 10 million times the multiplier effect, all of this will eventually cause the GDP to go up by 40 million. Or see it on here, the original increase in spending causes the GDP to go up by $40 million in this case. Okay, so that's how the model works. I'm going to stop there. Thanks for joining me on another video. It's been Mr. Hagan, and we'll see you on the next podcast.